Thank you, Anil. I'm not a practicing clinician for those just who really want to drill down to the facts. I used to do this a couple of decades ago. But I've learned a lot from it, and certainly think with some academic background and working in also public-private partnerships such as the Gates Foundation, as well as industry, I brought some experience to the agency that I think is critical in order to solve some of our health problems. Now, I modified the title a little bit. I'm talking also not just regulatory matters from clinician to clinician. I'm talking about particularly one aspect which concerns clinical trial innovation to improve drug development, also because I think that's certainly of great interest. The dog picture, I don't have to explain much, but it's pretty clear that the amount of money that we currently put into clinical development until we have a new product on the market is rather expensive, and it takes relatively long. And I think in order to address our public needs and the concerns for patients moving towards precision medicine and personalized medicine, we have to figure out how to do this in a different way. And FDA certainly is a partner in it. As our Commissioner Scott Gottlieb very actively and very well communicates. So he goes even as far to stipulate that we one day will leverage information for conducting in silico clinical trials, which of course requires excellent data sets, where we use trial designs that we haven't done before and that were not possible at the age of paper, where we strictly separated case report forms out of the electronic health records that we now have, and then later on tried to merge them back. So there's still a lot of work that is done just to deal with history. And again, to quote the commissioner, he stated in one of the meetings, if we would conduct aviation as we conduct clinical trials still today, we would build a new airport, new airplane, from point A to point B, and after we arrived in point B, we would probably dismantle all three elements of it. And that's just the reality, and that's something we need to overcome and rethink. So trial innovation also has to face the challenge of opportunity, where we deal with larger data sets. Larger data sets that are somewhat structured, and of course in terms of size, they are typically in gigabytes. And of course, the speed of that is, or the communication interaction is intermittent and not real time. But eventually, when we change things, and if we think of the future and the opportunities in digital revolution, we need to rethink this. This has significant impact. Drug development tools are advanced, and we... Oh my God, too many buttons here. With new drug development tools, we can do this much faster, and we will end up in a different situation, particularly also with the amount of data. So the typical historical, and Professor Hunzinger this morning in the morning made reference to this, the original approach of being reductionist and trying to generalize from certain patient population and certain diseases into simple common elements is certainly something that was historically important, but we're actually doing right now the opposite. We are moving into the fractile of disease definition, because each and every individual, for many reasons, is somewhat different, with all the similarities that will still help us to conduct clinical trials and make drugs that will serve a lot of people at the same time very well. So one of the steps that we have taken at FDA, particularly in a very active area, is the Center for Oncology of Excellence within FDA. It actually was started out of the Center for Drugs Evaluation and Research, CEDAR, and now has become an independent center that essentially directly reports to the commissioner. And what we want to accomplish is here the organization of opportunity, data, and and this all got transcribed in a very strange font. And this is interesting. Clinical trials, of course, we want to develop new pipelines, develop real-world data, and leverage sensors as well as omics. And of course, it's hard to read, but I think you get the idea. So now, the 21st Century Cures Act, also called the Affordable Cares Act, stipulates that FDA has to, if we want to be real to our public health mission, has to take a very active part in it. As such, patient-focused drug development is critical. Patient feedback, patient information, innovative trial designs, pragmatic trials, platform trials, and certainly using real-world evidence as opposed to non-real-world evidence, I guess. It's a nice word to circumscribe that we actually use not just coding and billing data for the analysis in the agency, but electronic health records. And currently we purchase those for the most part, and it's not always easy to evaluate on such basis because there's always a time delay. And when we come to the validation of new drug development tools or accompanying diagnostic for new drugs, we still struggle with rather long timelines. So if we want to validate a biomarker or early endpoint, it still takes us several years. And that, of course, is an opportunity for change. One of the elements that I think we need to be mindful of is the opportunity to restructure trial design and pragmatic trials with all its features that are closely related to the standard of care, and yet leverage the opportunity to do human experimentation is something that we need to do. In that context, FDA conducted an analysis with some collaborators at Harvard and a contractor to figure out what's actually the situation. And some of the examples are listed here: I-SPY, the lung map, and the font is so small on the screen that I really cannot see it. And of course, I don't have everything in my memory because I also flew from the US and the jet lag is horrible. But the BEAT, AML, Agile, and Precision Promise were part of the analysis. The goal was to figure out what is good, what is bad about it, how can it be leveraged. We talked to the stakeholders, we looked at the pros and the cons, we kicked the tires, and how can one develop a operating model and what can be recommended? How does it impact clinical trial design, and how becomes trial design flexible so that we truly can adjust to the results that we get back from the clinic? I picked here two examples to get a little bit more detail. Volatile, which basically deals with non-small lung cell carcinoma, and the I-SPY-2, which is a breast cancer trial, both aiming to assess some components that one cannot do in a single trial with a randomized control arm. The strength of such systems are in flexible trial design, which includes a response-adaptive randomization and the use of a common control. And I can tell you FDA is very interested in those approaches. In fact, we have research collaborations with both institutions. In the case of I-SPY-2, in the framework of the Centers of Excellence of Regulatory Science. And as you can see, there are now more than 10 biomarkers and signatures that are being used. And in fact, more than a dozen candidate drugs have been graduated through I-SPY-2. Some of the critical areas for optimization certainly include the study design, and that's oft tricky because to get a consensus between statisticians, clinicians, and regulators is not always easy. But in the context of platform trials, where this is more or less a consortial approach, and under circumstances also a public-private partnership, you can have those discussions with all stakeholders without raising the red flag of perception of conflict of interest. And you can do this with multiple partners, which is, I think, a great opportunity for innovators, because one of the major hurdles for small and medium-sized entities and innovators is to cross the valley of death. And I think Francis Richmond, also here, hi Francis, is going to address some of that in the context of education and how we need to change the knowledge in the workforce, how we approach those questions and how we create a dialogue with the agency. And I think platform trials are one of the opportunities because different stakeholders can be involved in a non-conflicting way. So for the future, of course, we are aiming towards I-SPY 3, which is essentially moving into phase 3 trial, which globally expands. And again, coming back to the opportunity for innovators, small or medium-sized entities can get in with the innovative product under an agreed-upon master protocol that truly serves the patient's interest first, and the regulators as well as the best experts in the field can participate in the trial design. And that is something we haven't done in the past, and we believe that this holds a lot of promise for the future also towards dealing with regulatory information in real time, because right now we always have this lag time in between where a patient essentially has to wait for the next decision. With platform trials and data use agreements, perhaps conducting review in the cloud where all the stakeholders have access to the extent of the specified role, I think we can make decisions for patients in real time. So some critical questions for the Food and Drug Administration would be how far can we get involved? And since I am already out of time, I certainly will leave this information with you, but I can tell you most anything is possible, particularly because there are all stakeholders involved, particularly because it is done in a transparent way. And it doesn't take off the competitive edge between different entities and entities in industry, or it does not interfere with market and profit considerations. The major impact here is that within a shorter period of time you can find a better target population in the context also of, if you want to call it, competitor drugs, that gives an opportunity essentially for the product to be marketed. So this is just an example that is truly consortial with different entities involved. And one, of course, things that I would not leave without saying is that when we do this collaboratively, including FDA researchers in the dialogue, the outcome and using the evidence that can be accessed under data use agreements in real time is significant. And as such, the return on investment in some of the evidence that we have from the studies is certainly enhanced, and that's to the benefit of everyone. Thank you. I also would like to acknowledge the contributions of Sharon Kozin. He's the Associate Director of the Oncology Center of Excellence, and the Informed Initiative, as well as Laura Esserman, who is heading the I-SPY 2 trial. Thank you.